Probably reading the same part of Mark. And then I'm just curious about it. And do you think that the Old Testament is the same? I know the Old Testament has not changed in 4 years. Although I have a really good translation. So, but so on that, but anyway, but you think like that's the same one you read 4 years ago? Why? You know what? Like when you go to Mass on Sunday, then it's
I tried. So you put it in.
It does plug in right here. So you gotta twist it. Now I'm on. And then twist. Okay. And is this supposed to live out a little out of the way? I don't know.
All I know is that that's supposed to be to Father's right with the MX logo facing him.
I think we gotta do it like that. Then it's.
Is it working?
Yeah. And you're live. So.
That's how he doesn't look bad.
Okay, pay attention now.
Okay, any second. And one. That's a second.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
We bless and praise you, Lord, for the gift of your word. And we thank you for allowing us to have this time together so that we can study your word and grow in a deeper understanding of what you're trying to teach us in our lives. We're truly grateful that we have this revelation to share that opens our hearts and our minds to Jesus Christ. And we ask that through this time today, Lord, that you increase our awareness of your presence and increase our awareness of your love so that we can respond more generously to your initiatives. And we ask all these things through our Lord, the Word made flesh, who lives and reigns forever and ever.
Amen.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
What are we doing today? We're looking at an intercalated story. So, just to kind of set up the situation so that you understand it, what we've had now is a teaching, and now we have a series of miracles. And so this miracle is the third. Well, actually, it's 3 and 4. But so we had some teachings or parables earlier in chapter 4, and now in the end of chapter 4, and in chapter 5, we have the 3 miracles. So Mark is setting up a little pattern here. So we're looking at, because this is an intercalated or sandwiched story, we're going to consider it to be one. And what's the miracle? Well, it's not the healing or the resurrections that occur, but the miracle is to come to understand who Jesus is as the revelation of the Father. So it's all about coming to know who Jesus is. And that's an important thing to think about as we study the scriptures and as we look at the Gospels, is to remember that the miracle stories do not exist as ends in and of themselves. So the point of the stories is not that this woman is made well. The point of the story is that Jesus is known as one who reveals the love and the grace and the power of the Father. through his actions. So that's what we're looking at today. Hi, Darlene.
Good morning.
So let's read through the story. It's a long one, given that there's actually two stories put together. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. So where is he? Yeah, but where is he?
Up on the other side, the south
He's on the other side of what?
Galilee. The lake. The lake.
You can't be on the other side of Galilee.
Huh?
You could be on the other side of the lake. Therefore, where is he?
He's on.
He's in Capernaum. Yeah, he was in the region of the Gadarenes, where he healed a man who was found in the tombs, possessed by demon, and then now he has crossed the lake to the other side. Jairus is usually connected with Capernaum. Now, so yes, he's made a journey over to Capernaum. All right. Should have said that at the beginning. All right. One of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, seeing him, fell at his feet and besought him, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, then came up and behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I shall be made well. And immediately the hemorrhage ceased, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone forth from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had been done to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But ignoring what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, he saw a tumult and people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a tumult and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. And he put them all outside. And he took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and walked, for she was 12 years old. And immediately they were overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this. And he told them to give her something to eat. Okay, some of you have been with me in this Bible study for 8 years. You should be able to teach this class. What do you have in your, Chris, what have you written in your Bible over the years?
All kinds of stuff. Well, where do you want to begin?
Whatever you think is pertinent.
Well, I have here, the theme is salvation,
Okay.
and let's see. Down in verse 23, I have driven, lay your hands on her so she may get well, and get well is to save. So
Yes. Okay, so let me put that up here. The word in Greek is sote, and it means to be well or to be saved. Okay? So, and that's used throughout this parable. So, salvation. The story is about salvation. Okay, other people who have been with me over the years? Is that it?
Well, I have a question.
Bill, you've been with me for 8 years.
Yeah, but I have a question what I thought about when I reread this earlier this week. You used the word amazed, and you have defined that for us over the years of what the Greek is. And I'm asking myself, what does utterly mean in Greek? The same thing?
Like utterly amazed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they were, and they were, what's it say? The word utterly, they were utterly astounded. And utterly, I looked up, it means complete without qualification. It also means many times Bill is confused. But I was wondering only when I read
What's
that
the
word,
question?
I said they always used amazed, and you've got a Bible that says, I have the New American Bible, and it said utterly. I wonder what.
Utterly. It
What
just
is- why
it just
there was
means
difference?
completely amazed.
Completely blown away.
Like not partially amazed. Oh well, that's curious. But totally.
When it was only those who were in the room,
Yeah.
and he told them to give her something to eat.
Yeah.
And food always had a significance for Jesus with his disciples. And
So what's the significance of the food?
I look.
He
upon
says,
it as
give her something to eat. Why?
The food is that you believe in Jesus and go forth.
So it's nourishment or it's what? What?
Say that again.
Is it nourishment?
I believe believing in Jesus is nourishment.
I do too. But is that the intent of giving her something to eat?
I thought also to show that she truly is alive.
Thank you.
Right.
That's good. So there's something hinting at the fact of the resurrection in this story. Although she's not resurrected, she's resuscitated. It's a hint at, do you remember when Jesus appears with his apostles on the night he is raised from the dead and he says, do you have anything here to eat? Remember that story?
Yes.
And he
Okay.
ate fish.
And he eats some fish. And why? Because he wants to reveal to them something about the truth of the resurrection. That we retain something of our original selves, and that reality is corporeal. You know, it has something to do with our bodies. Okay. Margaret, you have something from the previous years?
Father, well, I'm thinking of Jesus and women. There's a lot of stories about women. It seems like the really important ones. Is about women. This one, so Mark is trying to show or write about in the miracles. I mean, this was pretty wonderful. I mean,
What's that got to do with women?
so, yeah.
What's it got to do with women? Don't say yeah.
If I'm asking you,
Oh, okay. I'm going to introduce, and I've talked about this before, and it's probably somewhere in Chris's Bible. This is a gynecological story.
Really?
Has to do with women's health and women's reproductive systems. Did you know that? Yeah. You remember that? Yeah. Well, and I'll talk about that as we move ahead, but just kind of bring that out. What else do you remember from this story? Yeah.
The number 12, girl's 12 years old, the woman who's been suffering for 12 years.
Okay. So the author is making links between the two stories, not just putting two stories together, but there are actually some links that he wants to affirm in these two stories. So the 12-year-old and the 12 years of malady. Yeah. What else?
I have written down in the little bits that I can read from the
What good is writing stuff down if you can't read
I
it?
know, I realize, well, my glasses are not
Oh.
strong enough either, but I have written the two areas that, in the one thing with the child, that Jesus touches her, takes her hand, and that is taboo according to the purity laws, I believe, of the time of Jesus. And I was wondering, is that the case also with the woman who was hemorrhaging?
You're wondering?
Yeah.
You're supposed to be telling me.
Okay, well then I say that, yes.
Yes. Yes, you're right. Okay, so there's an issue of purity that underlies both of these stories and the purity laws. I was thinking today, the gospel for today is the story of a leper who is cured, and Jesus touches the leper. Now we know that Jesus doesn't have to touch to heal; he can heal from a distance. Why is he touching? I sometimes think that Jesus did it deliberately to flaunt the status quo and to just kind of, I'm going to reach out and touch you because everyone's against it. And I'm going to show them they don't have to be afraid, you know? So in this story too, we've got touch going on. Two touches, the touching of the cloth and Jesus touching the girl. All right, what else? From past years, Sabina, we're looking for information from the past years that you've been involved in Bible study.
well, I'm old, I forget a lot.
I might be wrong, but I seem like I remember you saying that the two stories are sandwiched.
Yeah, good. So they are what we call intercalated, layered. So a calation is a layer. So they're intercalated, so they're layered in like a sandwich. Now, anyone know why? Why does he put this story of the hemorrhaging woman right in the middle of the story of Jairus?
That's how Mark taught, using that method.
We don't know that. It might be true, but we don't know that. But it is certainly, it's a writing style, which.
So what I read about that, because that's what I saw, is it's a Markan sandwich. And so that was.
It's a Markan sandwich. Doesn't that sound funny? I'll have a Markan sandwich, please, for lunch today.
Description of a problem, so it's the description of how they come to Jesus. That the miracle worker, or the word or deed affects what the miracle is. And the third thing was the evidence that the miracle happened.
So they're intercalated, they're layered because they have the same truth that they're trying to convey. So Mark has discovered these two stories from the tradition. So remember that Mark is not sitting there writing down events as they happen, but rather he's reflecting on events some 40 years after Jesus is gone. And he's collecting these various stories from sources, and he's putting them in order. And so he's got a story of the woman with the hemorrhage and the woman, or the young girl who's deceased in Jairus' household. And he decides they belong together because they emphasize the same thing. Okay? So what's the common feature of both stories?
Faith,
Well, there's a number of them. Faith is one. Healing.
Restoring.
Okay, so we'll call that salvation. Okay.
12 years.
Sote. What?
12 years.
12 years. But that's just a mechanism that he's using to connect the two stories. It's not actually the themes of the story. Anything else? Okay, so faith and healing and salvation and yeah. So, and consequently, it revolves on a faith in Jesus, right? So it all is rooted in the idea that Jesus is the one who brings healing. Jesus is the one who brings salvation. Jesus is the one whose authority has the power to mend broken lives. Okay? All right, let's go back to the beginning of the story and let's kind of break it down a little bit since you've run out of important things to say. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Jairus. Now, there's very few people in the scriptures who are actually named. Jairus is named. Who else is named in the scriptures? Do you know? In Jesus' stories. In the stories of Jesus and his ministry.
Martha and Mary.
Luke's gospel names Martha and Mary. Lazarus. Who else?
Nicodemus.
Nicodemus.
Joseph, Arimathea.
Okay, Joseph of Arimathea. Bartimaeus, does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. Bartimaeus. Let's see. Zecharias in, yeah, but that's the pre-gospel. That's
Who was the guy?
Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, yeah. So Luke's gospel actually names a few more characters than most of the other gospels. But in this gospel, we're going to hear the name Jairus and Bartimaeus. And so they have some, you think about this now. If Mark is sitting down and composing these stories over the, that have endured over these years, he's putting them in some kind of order. And two names of all the characters in this gospel, two names remain, Jairus and Bartimaeus. What would that tell you as a person who would picking up this gospel? Of all the people in the gospel, two names. Anyone? Want to hazard a guess?
They're important. So what?
They're important people in what regard?
He's a Roman.
No, not in that sense. No, not in the sense of their biography.
Their position in the Jewish culture.
Not the Jewish culture. What culture are they positioned in? They're positioned in the Christian culture, the early Christian culture, like Simon of Cyrene. Okay? These people have some kind of presence in the early Christian church. Their names have been retained. Maybe that they themselves became part of the Christian community early on. And therefore their names were rather significant in terms of telling these stories and their connection and their rootedness in the person of Jesus and his historical walking the earth. Okay? So maybe there's a sense that there might be a tradition there that's recognizes these individuals. All right. So Jairus is called a synagogue. What do you have? Leader? President? What?
Synagogue, official.
Official? Anyone have anything else?
Synagogue official.
Okay, so it's difficult to know exactly what Mark is referring to by this title, because there were a couple individuals who organized the synagogue services. And maybe he was simply one of those who organized the synagogue service. And maybe each Sabbath, as they were preparing, this was the guy who chose the lector or chose the speaker or, kind of made sure the doors were open or whatever. So he may not have been like an official teacher. He may have just been like a mayordomo. Yes.
So I think I missed your point, that Jared, who was an.
Jared is somebody else.
That's Jared, but who was an official of the synagogue.
Yeah.
To me means that he was an official of the Jewish religious.
I don't
culture.
care what it means to you.
Okay, well, you've asked me, what does these things mean?
What it means
And you're
to
telling me
us.
that he is a Christian Jew now, that when Mark put this together.
Maybe. I don't say anything definitively in this class because I could get in trouble. Hi, Pope. I don't say anything definitively in this class. I suggest this might be the case. So here's the case. That his name is carried on through tradition some 50 years after Jesus could suggest that he was a member of the Christian community. All right?
Okay.
So, and then the whole concept of an official is difficult to define. Difficult to say what exactly that was.
Well, you use that word for particularly.
Yeah, but I have ruler. So
Oh, you have ruler.
yeah. Yeah.
I have a-
So there are different translations because we're taking Greek and we're taking ancient Greek, translating it into modern English is a broad spectrum of possibilities.
Like a
Or who has an official? You have official. We have that. It could be reading president of the or ruler or leader. So it could be
Synagogue
any of
official.
those.
Synagogue official.
Synagogue official. Okay. So moving on then. He falls at his feet. What do you take by that? Total pleading, total submission, total trust. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may live and be made well. And notice that he asks that hands be laid on her. Now it's important to realize that in the Old Testament, healing didn't occur by the laying on of hands. So it's not a biblical feature to lay on hands to heal somebody. Can you think of any healings that took place in the Old Testament?
Oh, the healing of the blind man with spit in the cloth.
Well, that's not Old Testament.
Oh, that's the Old Testament. I
Yeah,
missed that.
Old Testament.
I'm confused.
And how did do you remember any healing story? Do you remember when Elijah healed? There was Elisha laid on a boy. Yeah.
Then there was one where they had him go in, it wasn't Elijah, but they had him bathe 7 times in the.
And that was Naaman, and that was, yeah, okay. So different healing stories don't have the same idea of laying on of hands. Laying on of hands is actually a Greek concept. And, again, it's Greek culture from the year 300 BC through the time of Jesus. It was still Greek culture. And so Greek culture would have an influence on how a miracle would be expected or how a miracle might be described. It would be described in terms of Greek culture. So the laying on of hands, Jairus' expectation that Jesus would lay on hands, comes to him from a tradition now that's his Greek culture, his Greek cultural background, rather than a scriptural background. Does that make sense? Okay. So Jesus goes with him. A great crowd followed him, thronged about him, and a woman there who had a flow of blood for 12 years. This is where it gets gynecological. So the woman has it's this menstrual flow of blood, uterine flow of blood. And it's not constant because she would bleed out, right? But it's intermittent and uncontrolled. And that's what the author wants to suggest, that she's not bleeding all the time, but that she's in a situation of weakness and constant flow, or often continuous flow, and therefore she is really depleted. Now, how this woman is described is amazing, because she's described as a wealthy woman, a single woman, a woman who has used her resources to seek a cure, and who finally is impoverished. So it's kind of like we're seeing a little mini drama in this woman's life, just by a few lines, okay? So she's suffering for 12 years, so let's emphasize the fact that she's in a sort of a hopeless situation. She had spent all that she had. Notice it doesn't say she spent her family's money, she spent her husband's money. It says she spent all that she had. So she's a person of means, or was a person of means. She was no better, but rather grew worse. What does that say? That tells you the physicians are phonies and couldn't help her, and yet would continually take her money. So she's given away everything to these physicians who do not help her, but in fact, she gets worse through the whole course of things. She doesn't even stay stable. She grew worse. And then finally, she is impoverished because she had spent all that she had. All that she had. So she's now depleted in every respect. Now, what's her social, spiritual situation? Her spiritual situation is that she is ritually unclean all this time. Okay? She's ritually unclean. She cannot approach God because of the flow of blood. So again, the idea of blood as being the sign of the sacred, or the presence of the sacred in a living being, you don't engage in blood at all, but she has to. So she's constantly unclean, ritually impure, unacceptable to God and unacceptable among her own people, because when somebody is ritually unclean through the flow of blood, they have to isolate. It's like COVID.
Ring a bell with
So it's like they have to stay by themselves. And people have to bring them food and stuff like that, because they can't do anything, because they can't have contact with anybody. So she's isolated, she's poor, she's sick, she's depleted, she's everything. And finally, she hears about Jesus. Now, we've already heard that reports about Jesus have spread around the whole region. That back in chapter 3, the author, Mark, makes the point that his reputation is spread. It's coming up in chapter 7. We'll hear it again. His reputation has spread throughout the whole region. So she's heard the reports about Jesus. She comes up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. Now, if you're impure and ritually unclean, you don't touch anybody because that makes them ritually unclean. So this woman is not only endangering herself by venturing into public. First of all, she ventures into public, she ventures into a public forum, and she touches somebody else. She's doing everything wrong. Not unlike Michelle, you know. She's doing everything wrong, and Jesus is supernaturally aware that something has happened. He calls it experiencing dynamis, dynamis, the Greek word, power, dynamite, has gone forth from me. I have felt something that we're supposed to kind of interpret as some divine entity that Jesus possesses, and that it has gone out from him. So she has already concluded that if she touches his garment, she'll be made well. Well, Jesus informs her then, it's not the touching of the garment that made you well. It's your faith that made you well. All right, so she experiences this healing in her body. Jesus, knowing that power, asks, who touched my garments? Why would Jesus do that?
Because he felt the power coming out of him. So
No. I mean, I feel power going out of me all the time. I don't have to ask who touched my garments.
I don't have that situation. So.
Why would he ask that?
So he could make the point with her that it wasn't the garment touching.
Exactly. He needed a one-on-one encounter with her. She was not going to get away with just sneakily touching him and going off cured. She needed to profess or acknowledge that Jesus was the source of her healing, not the touching of the garment. And so he needed to confirm that publicly, okay? Because, again, the gospel is about a public proclamation of who Jesus Christ is. It's not about private, personal miracles. It's always about the public perception of Jesus.
The issue of blood, was that a Jewish culture thing, or did they believe that came from God as a law or rule or command?
So we don't know the origins of these kind of traditions, where they developed from. It makes good sense in a primitive mind to connect blood with life force. But only when the 10 Commandments are issued do we have a sense of this idea of avoid blood. So that is really reflected in the dietary laws, and then later on in laws about conflict, the use of force, military, what do you do with blood in a battle, and all that kind of stuff has to be legislated later on. And so we hear about King David. Now we're talking about 250 years later, after who commands that his soldiers have to go through a purification after each battle. They have to sequester themselves and go through a time of prayer and purification. So the tradition of blood has an obscure origin and then is kind of ratified with the covenant about eating animals that have blood in them, and then is further clarified as the tradition develops. So no, there's no initial law. There's only the development of tradition.
So what about about like after birth and those kinds of traditions.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's why we celebrate 40 days after Jesus' birth, because Mary needed a time of purification because she was involved with blood. Yeah. Okay, so he looked around to see who had done it, and the woman, knowing what had happened, came in fear and troubling and fell down before him, told him the whole truth. And then he declares to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." And just a minute. And continually be healed of your disease. So he's like offering a healing that goes beyond the present moment. He's suggesting that healing is now a lifelong unfolding for you. You know, healing is much broader. Okay, who had their hand up? Sabina.
I thought it was interesting that the apostle said to him, there are so many people around you pressing on you, and you notice that one person that touches you.
You find that interesting?
Yeah, because they say, how did you realize it was this one person that got healed, but when everybody presses on you?
So therefore, what do you make of that?
Well, that they were amazed that he could realize that he noticed that
So
one particular person.
it's good that you bring this up, because think about this. What have they already been through? What was the first miracle? Do you remember the first miracle of last week? Last week's miracle. What was last week's miracle? The what?
Fishes and loaves.
No. We haven't done the fish and loaves. We're going to get to that. What was last Sunday? Hello. Were you at church? What I talk about? The bark of Peter, the water, the boat, you know, the calming of the water.
Your picture, your painting.
Woo!
Yeah,
Makes me wonder what I've been doing for 40 years.
Preaching to older people.
All right, so they have been through the whole cataclysm of the amazing storm, and they watched Jesus calm the sea, and they said, "Who is this that even calms the sea and calms the wind, that they obey him?" Well, they know. They don't want to admit it, but they know. Now, why would they be surprised at this point that Jesus might know that somebody touched his garments? One of the things that Mark does in his gospel is he delightfully shows us how dense the apostles are. He does that so that you won't feel as dense as you are.
The rest of us.
Because we don't catch on to what's going on. Neither did the apostles. And so they're, in fact, this statement, you see how the crowd is pressing around you and you ask who touched you? It's rather a rude and an impertinent statement to Jesus. But he doesn't deal with it. He just kind of moves aside.
So here you just said that he wanted the woman to know that she was healed and the crowd to know.
Uh-huh.
And then over here, when the little girl is saved, he doesn't want anybody to tell
We'll
anyone.
get to that.
Okay.
All right. So let's go back to Jairus and his crew. While he was still speaking, they came from the ruler's house and said, "The daughter is dead." What I want you to see is, how did Jesus heal the woman? What words did he say?
Your faith
Go
is
with
healed.
faith. Faith is healed.
Your faith is healed.
You missed the first word. Daughter.
Daughter.
Daughter. That's another link between the two stories. And it's very affectionate on Jesus' part. It's affection. My daughter. Your faith has healed you. Now, a daughter has died. So it's sort of like escalating the odds here. Okay. Why trouble the teacher further? Jesus ignores or overhears. Do you have ignores or overhears? Disregards. Okay, disregards what they say. And he says, do not fear, only believe. How does yours read? Just like that?
Do not be afraid.
Do not be afraid.
Just have faith.
Just have faith. Okay.
Mine says fear is useless. What is needed is trust.
Yeah, I like that translation. That's the old NAB.
You know, the way the language comes out, it can be a little bit confusing. The question might be to Jesus from if one of us were in that milieu, how did you know you were touched?
Say that again.
Well, and rather than saying, the question for me, if I were in that milieu,
Yeah.
Jesus, how did you know you were touched?
Oh, we're past that story.
Oh, okay.
We're in the new story now of that expression, have faith, do not persist in your disbelief. I was just kind of, you want me to go back there?
No.
Okay, all right. So, yeah, so the question is, how does the Bible translate this? In different traditions have different ways to translate it.
Well, when I look at this, do not be afraid, just have faith.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's just, all you need is faith. That's what I'm hearing from this.
Yeah, that's it exactly. I mean, and the woman in the previous story demonstrated that. She just kind of disregarded every other taboo or problem that she faced, and she just had faith that if she touched his garment, she'd be healed. And it is that inner dynamic, that inner attitude that brings about the healing. So he's asking the man now, Jairus, to have that same inner attitude. Okay. And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John. Why? Why? I'm asking you.
I don't know.
You don't know?
To group his disciples.
They were the same three who accompanied him, Mount Tabor at the Transfiguration and in Gethsemane.
And so therefore,
And they were solicited by Jesus together.
okay, so the first three
The first-
called.
Yeah.
Although there's some confusion whether Andrew was part of that or not. But the first three called, and the witnesses to the transfiguration and the agony in the garden. So if they are witnesses to the transfiguration and agony in the garden, why are they witnesses of this event? Three events that these three get to witness in the Gospels. What connects these three events?
What connects them to convince them who Jesus is?
Okay, and who is he?
He's the Son of God.
Okay, he is God. Okay,
He's God.
he's God, and therefore he has power over life and death. He has a connection to the law and the prophets as the revelation of God, and he has to endure suffering so as to attain eternal life. So, in three ways, these three apostles get to share in something that's key to Jesus' identity and his self-understanding. Okay? So this miracle of the raising of Jairus' daughter has a unique status in the Gospels. There's no other miracle that has this kind of private audience. But these three are private audience because it's revelation. It's revealing who Jesus is as God incarnate. Right, Jerry?
Right.
Right. You knew that. All right.
Father, and you said too, that was, it was was resuscitated, not she was raised from the dead.
No. She was raised from the dead, but it's resuscitation, not resurrection.
And that would be really important for them to do there, I think, to separate Jesus and that his identity.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Let's take a break because Angie's getting hungry for another cupcake. Let's take a quick break, 5 minutes. Get up. Go. Get up and go. Get up and go.
I thought we were doing Genesis today because I was looking at that. That's Friday. So, no. It is sometimes. I don't doubt that. I just, it's
Okay.
Maybe it's defective, they forgot. It's the Hebrew Bible. There's two others. So I thought you were Genesis. This is that one. I got into reading Genesis and Exodus. Yeah, like we're saying, this is not a book. So try to read along.
Is
Somebody-
there another name for the book of wisdom?
No, it's not in the Protestant Bible. And so,
Is the King James?
Protestant, yeah.
Okay, once again, I'm burned. I'm getting a new Bible.
You need a new Bible, that's right.
He beats me up on mine.
You got a King James too?
No, it's the NIV, but he's pounded me on it a few times. Like I need to get the Catholic Bible.
I'm getting a Catholic
But
Bible.
I have the
that's it.
lectures book, so
I didn't know this was-
Not only is it difficult to find references to the Book of Wisdom, nobody's written really a volume about the Book of Wisdom because most scholars, biblical scholars, are Protestants. And so they don't believe that the Book of Wisdom is part of Scripture. And so nobody's written a commentary on it. So that's going to be my next challenge. I'm going to write a commentary on wisdom.
I raised this to be good for a second slash, but I just saw it, yeah. Me too.
I'm getting a new Bible.
Okay. Resuming where we were. Are you not going to eat that cupcake?
I'm a lot afraid to.
Oh, it's all right.
Yeah,
It's all right. Nobody's going to laugh at you.
you
But who cares?
do. You have to be nice.
I'm always nice to you, Angie.
No, you're not.
I let you pray. I let you when you come up to communion and you've got that rosary wrapped around your hand. I let you do that.
I'm gonna wrap it around you.
Uh-oh.
One of these days. Uh-oh.
You're on camera.
Oh, no.
All right. Looking at the rest of this story, I'm at verse 39. So he went in, said to them, "Why do you make a tumult and weep?" Again, just to remind you that in the ancient Israelite culture, you would hire people to weep and mourn and moan and screech, and the more you could display your sadness or your sorrow, the more honorable you were, because you showed other people how much you loved. So if you had somebody hire a few women like Michelle and Angie to screech at your funeral and to whine and wail, wow, you must have been pretty important, you know? So here's these people doing all this, and Jesus declares that the child is not dead but sleeping. They laughed at him. So derision, laughter at Jesus, or dishonoring Jesus is part of the tradition that Jesus faces in his career. We've already heard that the Pharisees and the scribes have derided him, and now we hear that the public is also deriding him because he represents a truth that they do not hold. All right, so he puts them all outside, gets the child's father and mother, and those who are with him, the three, and went in where the child was, taking her by the hand. This is the ultimate taboo, by the way. This is the worst thing that you can do is to grab a corpse, okay, or to touch a corpse, or to accidentally step on a grave. You never want to accidentally step on a grave, okay?
But you can do it on purpose.
That's why Jesus calls the Pharisees whitewashed tombs. He calls them whitewashed tombs because that's how you made sure that people didn't step on a grave. You whitewashed them. And so it was just a symbol that you're a place of dead bones. You're a whitewashed tomb, place of dead bones. And I don't want to have contact with you. Anyway, here.
So why did you not want people to watch him wake up this girl? What was the reason?
I'll get to that.
Oh.
Okay. Taking her by the hand, he says to her, Talitha koumi, or koum. And Talitha koum means, doesn't mean little girl, get up. It means, Talitha means little lamb. That's literally what it means, little lamb. And it's a diminutive used for a young woman. And so what Jesus is doing by calling her in this way is, first of all, familial and intimate, because it's not a title that you would just use with anybody. Familial and intimate, and a declaration of her status. Okay? So, what is her status? She's a girl of 12. What does that mean? She is a woman. She's on the cusp. Okay? She's on the cusp. And she's of marriageable age. Okay? At 12. See, Michelle, that's why you're not married.
That's right.
Your mother didn't put you out there at 12 years old.
Still hides me in the closet.
Still hides you. Yeah. So the whole idea was that a woman who began menstruation, a young girl who began menstruation, and that's around the age, is ready for marriage. And so here's that gynecological uterine flow of blood issue moving underneath this story. Okay? So she's ready for marriage, ready for life, ready to conceive, ready to participate in that fuller sense of giving life, and she's dead. So Jesus is going to restore her to her life-giving potential. And we're to see it not simply in a physical sense, but that life-giving potential that all of us have, to bring about life and to encourage and engender life in other people is not simply a sexual thing, but it's the very nature of our lives as human beings. What we give to each other, we help each other attain to a fuller life. So this miracle then of raising this child from the dead is so significant in terms of revealing who Jesus is as one who restores life, that it has to be kept secret. It is kept secret because Jesus does not want to be known as a miracle worker. Okay? He does not want to be known for his otherworldly gifts, because that would fail. That would cause people to fail to understand who he really is as the revelation of the Father. They would focus on, wow, you could do these amazing things. We're going to have you come over to our house tomorrow and heal grandma. We're going to have you next week to heal our, Down syndrome child or whatever. That's not why Jesus came. Jesus came to reveal the love of the Father. And the love of the Father will manifest itself in terms of how the world operates. And it'll be manifested in the world. So he had to select those who would not publicly proclaim this sign to the world. He had to say, no, these people are excluded from this kind of a thing, because this is too intimate in terms of defining Jesus' true authority and true relationship to God. And they don't get it because they haven't been part of this unfolding revelation. They haven't been a part of this. And so they won't get it. And so that's why he's very careful about who observes this. It's just like, at the resurrection. We learn in the Acts of the Apostles, Peter declares, he has appeared not to all, but to those of us to whom it is given. So, yeah, he didn't appear to everyone as a resurrected figure. He appeared to selected people so that they would then take that message out.
Okay, so he was in a crowd when the woman touched his garment, and then he wanted everyone to know there. So why did he want people to know there? And
it's not life and death.
Okay.
It's a healing.
Okay.
And some of his miracles are done in public, and some of them are done in private. And it really depends on, the gospel tradition is there are certain things that Jesus does because they declare, in a certain sense, who he is. There are certain things that Jesus does that will lead to confusion.
Okay.
And so there's a differentiation between those kinds of things. So we also hear the story of the man born blind. Jesus takes him off by himself. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And cures him by himself he says, don't tell everyone.
But even to this day, I meet people who believe Jesus is a miracle worker and not the Son of God.
I believe he is a miracle worker, but that's not his essential identity. And if that's how they see him as their essential identity, they've misunderstood what he came to teach us. what he came to reveal. So tell them that.
I try.
But tell them in a nice way. Okay, so 12 years old, ready for marriage, et cetera, in terms of that whole issue of being able to. And so the woman who has a hemorrhage for 12 years has been unable to conceive. Now she is brought into that place of she can produce life. So she may have been like, I mean, she may have started this uterine flow of blood when she was first menstruating. She could only be 24 years old, 25 years old at the point of this miracle. So she has generative years ahead of her as well. So, see the connections?
Yes.
It's a great story, isn't it?
When all the people who were weeping and crying at the death of the little girl, when she came alive again or resuscitated, what are
Don't ask me about what happens after the story ends.
they have to tell people lies? Like it didn't happen. Don't tell them what.
It's not the point.
That's what.
We can't conjecture about the unknown future of the ends of stories in the Gospels. That's not their point, you know? What happened after the disciples got back to land after Jesus stilled the sea? Did they tell anyone? Maybe, a whole group of people converted at that point, and maybe they brought other people to Jesus, and maybe that's why there was this. It doesn't do any good to conjecture that way, right? All right, let's take a look at, what do we have? Wisdom. Okay, now some of you are discovering if you have a Protestant Bible, you don't have this book. And could anyone kind of rehearse or kind of re-share why the Catholic Bible has 7 books that the Protestant Bible doesn't? Does anyone remember why?
They were originally in the Aramaic version.
Hebrew
version, and we got around to Martin Luther. He said, "Nope, those are not in the Bible."
But there's an earlier episode. You got to remember this too. The Council of Jews, when they were establishing what was going to be contained in the sacred scriptures, their sacred scriptures, which was well after Jesus, so some 100 years after Jesus' death, the Jewish people got together and decided we're not going to accept anything that was written in Greek that doesn't have an origin in Hebrew that we can resource. So that's why Luther went back to that.
So the Anglican Church, right, which broke off because King Henry and divorce, did they still bring the entire Bible because they were Catholic?
No, they went eventually in that Reformation. They went along with Luther. Yeah.
Didn't you say that at one point they have found some Hebrew versions of some of the books?
Yes.
In
But
recent history.
Yeah, it's difficult to date them. That's the challenge. If you could date these Hebrew versions back to 50 BC, you might have an argument to say that these actually do have an origin in Hebrew, but they can't. As far as I know, they can't date them in that precise a sense. So, all right, Book of Wisdom. Oh, it's this mess. 1, 13 to 15, 2, 23 to 24. Because God did not make death, nor does he rejoice in the destruction of the living. For he fashioned all things that they might have being, and the creatures of this world are wholesome. There is not a destructive drug among them, nor any domain of Hades on earth. For righteousness or justice is undying. And then we jump to 23 and 2. For God formed us to be imperishable. The image of his own nature he made us. But by the envy of the devil, death entered the world, and they who are allied with him experience it. All right, so did you learn something about death?
It's all the devil's fault. The devil made us do it.
Well, where did the devil come from?
He's a fallen angel.
Well, where did the fallen angels come from?
God in heaven.
Oh, so God made the devil, and the devil made death.
That's what it's saying.
I'm asking, you know.
That's what I'm reading.
Okay.
That seems logical.
Does it? Okay.
Well, death comes from the Genesis, right, the garden, I thought.
Okay.
When the devil tempted. using-
Why do you think that was the devil? It just says the serpent.
Oh, okay, that's true.
Is it a devil?
Oh, he's assumed it was.
Why do we assume that the serpent in the garden was the devil?
Because he's forcing the little kids to do bad. And he
Why do we assume that the serpent is the devil? It never says that this is the devil.
Because he influenced sin to come into our lives.
And he's going against the Father, right? He's going against the Creator because he's trying to undo what he did.
Yeah, but I go against the Creator sometimes. It doesn't make me the devil.
I'm not so sure.
Are you sure?
All right. Well, here's the answer to that question. We assume that the serpent is the devil because of this reading.
Oh, oh, that's too simple.
It's kind of simple, but yeah, this is one of the reasons why we assume that the serpent is the devil, because it says so in the book of wisdom that the serpent or the devil was envious and brought about death. So he's already made the connection between the serpent in Genesis and the devil, who
Who wrote wisdom? Who wrote wisdom?
some wise guy. It's traditionally called the Wisdom of Solomon. So it's kind of written in the context that Solomon had kind of amassed or gathered his wisdom and somehow produced it. But the Book of Wisdom is too new. The Book of Wisdom was still being composed when Jesus was alive. So it didn't even exist as a full book until sometime around Jesus, So it offers us a very late, in terms of biblical theology, a very late theology, very different than some of the early ideas about Satan, sin, death, and all that kind of thing. But I find it fascinating that if God isn't responsible for death, ultimately he has to be, because he created the one who created death. And therefore, just by logic, he's responsible for death. He allowed Satan to create death. But this challenges, I think, our understanding of the natural world, because we always talk about death being a natural part of the world, right? No? We don't talk about it that way?
No, we do now.
We do. But
The Garden of Eden, it wasn't supposed to be.
I know. So, therefore, there's no such thing as aging, right? And no decay of cells or of life forces but our bodies, how could they possibly endure? Because they're made to run down like a clock, They're made that way. Well, who made me that way? God made me that way. So what the author is talking about is a different perception of the world and a different perception of death. So the body and its natural decay is inevitable. And so one has to say that this is all part of the divine plan, right? It's all part of the divine plan that we should die. Mythologically speaking, however, we want to understand it in terms of guilt. How are we guilty? How does sin enter into this whole project so that it contaminates us because God only wants life? How does death enter into this whole process as something that makes sense? So, did you have a thought?
Yeah. It's kind of out there, but let me throw it out.
All right.
Well, God gave man free will, and maybe he gave angels free will as well. And Satan and the demons that Jesus used to purge were those who exercised the free will to not follow him.
Mm-hmm.
And the angels who have their head on straight are there. And so because of that free will, that created death, not God creating death.
Okay. And do you want to buy that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't think we're dying, our body is dying, but we're living on.
Okay, so let's say death here is not the death of our bodies, but the death of ourselves. And we differentiate between, yes, our bodies are actually decaying as we live, and they will eventually disappear, but that's not ourselves. You know, our self is something much bigger than simply our body. And therefore, what can create real death, that is the loss of self, the loss of self can only be a result of Satan. Okay? So you can't lose yourself because you don't have that capacity. But if Satan or the devil turns you away from God, then you've lost whatever potential you have for life. And you have no life in you. So we call that hell. It's just my way of thinking about it. And yeah.
So God created the devil and the angels. That's just not mentioned in the creation story.
Oh, that's a pre-biblical story that is presumed by the Bible writers, that somewhere sandwiched in that whole creation account, we have to take account of the spirit world, and therefore a later tradition grew up to define how that happened. And then we have the story of Michael and the angels and the good angels and those who rebelled against God in disobedience and would not obey God's commands. And it's a wonderful myth of where the dark side came from. That becomes sort of common knowledge without it ever appearing in Scripture. So when we read the book of Revelation, for instance, we have very good evidence that people understood this story about Michael and about Lucifer and about the battle between the forces of good and evil. And this was a pre-existence thing that happened before the world and human life was created. And therefore we are victims of that, that unfolding. And yet it's never fully described, as what happened. It's just presumed you know the story. You better know the story, Donna.
I've never thought about that God created the devil.
You thought that the devil created himself?
He created us in his image, and no one ever thought about it.
So do you know the story?
Obviously not.
So the story is that God created the angels as his helpers in the cosmology. And that some of the angels, under the guidance and leadership of an archangel named Lucifer, decided to rebel against God and said, we will not obey the divine creator. And therefore they were cast into hell. And before they were cast into hell, there was a huge battle between Michael and the good angels and Lucifer and the bad angels. The bad angels lost, got sentenced to hell. The angels then kind of ruled over heaven with God. And then Satan and his minions were down in the netherworld. And the world was the interplay of these forces, that evil forces and good forces, they all had equal access to us who lived on this plane of the world. And therefore we are victimized by Satan and his minions, and we are helped and supported by the angels and their minions. Okay? So, again, it's not in the Bible. It's an extra biblical source that most people assume is true. And in the Bible, they assume that that story was true.
When I read 13 and 14, and you describe what happens when you give up self, it all reminds me that God made us and we never die, we just transition.
Right.
And we transition to a good place or we transition to
Right.
a bad place.
Right?
So,
which is not really a place at all,
right.
but is a context in which we are alive.
That whole thing makes me think that everything that has a soul will never die. We whether live in a good place or not, but
That is true.
Souls will never die.
What is a soul?
Only in the humans.
No, the human body will die, but the soul will never die.
What is a soul?
Yourself.
That's right, yourself.
Okay. So the self doesn't die. What about animals? Do they have souls?
No.
I wonder sometimes.
Ours does.
I can't hear you.
You're not defining self as ego.
Oh, no. Ego is just one compartment of the self. Because we have id and superego, if you're going to go with those Freudian terms. Ego is just a part of the self.
So self transitions with us in a resurrected body?
Isn't that what you have always believed?
No, I don't know.
Did you work it?
I guess I.
Otherwise, you become another self. That doesn't make any sense. You can't become another self. You are who you are.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is going to transition to another reality.
But the reality of Satan being able to get out of hell and keep coming at us also, I believe, helped God to create the Paschal mystery and bring Jesus on earth in quest of us.
Absolutely. So if we say that the power of Satan, the power of the evil one over human lives is so
Threatening.
I want to say threatening to us and draws us out of our original dignity as God's children, that we needed somebody to rescue us. Yeah. So I gotta end this. I'm already 25 minutes late. But,
So is our true self our soul?
Yes.
Sabina says yes. So I would say yes, but I think I don't know about you, but I was always, I mean, the image I always had was the soul's this little white light in me, but that's not accurate. And I that's why I hesitate to say the self is the soul, because we think of it in those kind of graphic terms. Bye.
Thanks, Father. Sure.
Hey, some of you haven't registered for the Israel trip yet. I'm telling you, get on board. I only have like 5 people registered right now, so I'm looking for more.
Are you gonna pray before you?
No, we just let in because I go to pray over there.
Okay. Should we begin and end every meeting in prayer?
What?
You should begin and end every meeting.
I hate should.
Good session.